Good afternoon. It's Sunday afternoon, the last weekend in January of 2021, the last day in January of 2021. Um, and these are some remarks first, and then I'll do the words for the wind. Uh, Probably by the end of the week, if you're a registered parishioner, and the only condition that is that it gives us your address. So by the end of the week, you should receive our second newsletter, and the newsletter will have things that hopefully are of interest to you about the parish and where we are and in these days of pandemic and exile and separation. But included in that will be the plans for Ash Wednesday, which will be decidedly different this year. Among other things, that will cover the issue of palms. And there are some suggestions in there of what you can do with palms if you care to create your own ritual at home. Actually, you can do anything you want with your palms, but you may want to create a ritual. But what we don't want you to do with your palms from last Palm Sunday, well, you didn't even get them last Palm Sunday. Don't bring palms to church. Don't put them in plastic bags and tie them in triple knots and try and get them in the mailbox and that kind of stuff. We have more than enough ashes from previous Ash Wednesdays, so don't bring them. But you can also see the instructions for how we're going to do Ash Wednesday. They'll be posted online. I know that some of you had problems with the first newsletter, not getting it until after Christmas. That's because, and I don't understand this, certain zip codes in Indiana, even though we mail everything in Indiana, I think at Cherville or Dyer, I'm not sure which post office, some mail going to Indiana zip codes has to go from Indiana to Illinois and then back to Indiana. And so because those were all mailed third class, when they got to Illinois, they just sat until the post office was ready to process them. But those zip codes will be mailed first class, and you should get them this week. That being said, here's the words for the wind. I'm not going to talk about the gospel. I mean, I liked talking about it, but I think you might like this better. Yesterday, we had a funeral for Maria Filosa, a 97-year-old woman. And if you Google St. Maria Goretti-Dyer, YouTube Maria Filosa, Filosa, you can find it, I hope. If not, call the office and we'll email it to you. And then you want to go to the 1 hour, 9 minute, 53 second mark. On the YouTube video, there'll be a little line, you can advance it. Speed it up to 1 hour, 9 minutes, 53 seconds, and then play and watch it. And you'll see something that I hope makes you smile, makes you feel good, lifts your hearts, gives you some joy, even on this snowy day, which, by the way, I love, but I know everybody doesn't love it. But you'll just love it. But here's the backstory on it. 7 years ago, we had Maria's husband's funeral, and she has an only child, a son, and at the meditation time after communion, they had asked if we could play the music Unforgettable. Some of you will remember that song. I'm sure many of you find it memorable because it's unforgettable. And so we got a DVD of it and we played that song, and just completely spontaneously, Maria and her son got up and waltzed around the coffin in church. It was just in my opinion, a very, very moving, human, lovely experience. Maria and her husband were together for 78 years. They met when they were 13 at a school dance in Brooklyn, and then 5 or 7 years later, I can't remember the exact details, they eloped and went to Baltimore, and somehow they convinced the Archbishop of Baltimore to marry them on the spot, because he was shipping out to Europe for the Second World War the next day. And then they made their way to the Chicago area, to East Chicago, I guess, and then ultimately they moved to Northgate, that neighborhood in Dyer. And when her husband died, we had the funeral, and they had that wonderful experience. But you watch yesterday's funeral. It'll be worth the trouble trying to find it. And if you can't, call the office and we'll help you. So here's my reflection. The very first human manifestations of response to mystery being revealed to us was not with words. Nobody tried to explain it. Nobody tried to organize it. It was with ritual. It was with music, sound. Probably the first musical instruments were percussion instruments, which could replicate the sound, the first sound that we ever heard, which was the sound of our mother's heart beating. And so when we look at what we erroneously call primitive people, doing their rituals, drums and percussion instruments, that heavy beating is an important part of that, as it is today with a lot of music. I mean, drummers, that's the remnant of the original sounds that we hear, and that's the sounds of our mother's heart beating. And we see that as we touch the sacred with that. Religion means to relate to bind up with. And so our ancestors didn't try and explain that. They tried to experience it and hand on those experiences. And so music was first, dance accompanied music. It was many, many years before words became, many generations before words became associated with religion. The rituals were important. The first sacred spaces were undoubtedly, at least for our ancestors, forests, glades, groves, where trees would shelter a certain spot that people would decide this is something special. This is a place of out of the ordinary. This is what we call sacred. You can see remnants of that through the Jewish Bible, what we call the Old Testament, where certain things happen at oak trees. Oak trees and groves of oak trees played very, very important parts in the expression of the relationship that our ancestors had to mystery. And then along with that was birds, because birds weren't bound to the earth. Birds could move into the heavens, and so birds were considered to be carriers of revelation. And the first priests, I mean, if you want to use that word, although that was not a word at the time, the first priests were people who would dissect birds and then try and discern from the seeds in their intestinal tracts. I know this sounds gross, but try and discern what the mystery that we call God, they didn't necessarily use that word at all, but what that mystery that we call God was revealing, and then how they could respond to that. It was only much later in the history of humankind that language became and words became the expression of God's revelation. If you look at in what we call the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, the first book of Genesis, in the beginning, God says things and things come into being. God speaks. The prologue to John's Gospel in the New Testament, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. We tend to identify the divine mystery with word, with speaking. Then, of course, what happened is then the concern became not so much the expression of the revelation, but the content of the revelation, and then how it was to be expressed in words became very crucial, became extremely crucial. Judaism, if you look in what we call the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, is loaded with words that tell us what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do and all that sort of thing. In our Catholic world, Catholicism, what we call Catholicism, was the first evolution out of Judaism, became very concerned with words in the beginning, how to express something accurately and correctly. And those were the beginnings of why we had all the schisms and separations and heresies and all that kind of stuff, was because of nouns and verbs and context and so on, syntax. All of that became incredibly important. And then by the time we get to the 15th, 16th century in Catholicism, the dominant religion of the Western world, language became essential, crucial, and it became, in a sense, everything got reduced to words, saying the correct words, saying the correct words in the correct way, making sure that a gesture matched the correct word, and so on. And in my opinion, that took away the idea of mystery. There was no longer mystery because we felt that we had tremendous clarity, that this could mean this and only this. And being correct became the primary concern in Western Christianity. That's why we have so many divisions in it, because people were convinced that the other guy wasn't correct. And so the gospel takes that on today, just by the way, when Jesus tries to abolish the whole notion of clean and unclean. But anyway, you don't have to go there. So what I want to suggest to you in this snowy afternoon, and as this week goes forward, try and find some non-verbal revelations of mystery in your life. You know, nature is, we've allowed weather to become this obsessive need to talk about it constantly on the news, for hours of talk about the weather, and we don't enjoy the weather. The weather is the weather. It's not an enemy. It's not a foe. It's the weather. And nature presents all kinds of wonderful manifestations of itself in weather. You can listen to music. Try and find a channel and on your radio, or if you're internet savvy, there's all sorts of places where you can find music. Listen to something that you don't normally listen to. Go back and listen to Unforgettable. You know, you can Google those things and find the music that spoke to you at different times in your life when you were young and filled with hope and optimism, and the word COVID wasn't even heard of. I know that we have zillions of things to be worried about. I know we've got zillions of things to be frustrated about. We've got zillions of things to be angry about and all that kind of stuff. We're just overwhelmed with words, and I do that too. But try and find some time this week to let yourself enjoy something other than words. Not that words are bad. I love to read and I love to listen to people talk. But there are ways of doing that allow you to be freer and more lighthearted. Peace be with you.